Picture the world in 5 years. What do you see for yourself and your loved ones? What about 10 or 20 years? Where do you call home? What are you hopeful for? I'm hopeful for a world where social and environmental justice is an attained reality and not some ambitious goal. And I believe that is possible with the power of love. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a vivid reminder that we are intimately connected with nature and all of its living beings. Whether we recognize it or not, we are a part of this ecosystem, and our actions have tangible consequences. However, the burden of these consequences are not evenly distributed. These disparities were not born in 2020, despite how chaotic this year has been. Long-standing environmental racism, whereby Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities are disproportionately exposed to toxins and hazardous waste facilities as companies deem their communities more profitable places to do their dirty work. These same people suffer food apartheid as they're deemed not profitable enough for grocery stores. Connecticut is not exempt from this, as 1/5 of the entire state's pollution is located in Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, Stamford, and Waterbury. The 5 out of 169 municipalities where 71% of all the state's people of color live. Bridgeport and Hartford, two of my hometowns, have the largest and second largest incinerators, yet I remember struggling to find a good grocery store and healthy food. And the result of this occurring nationally? High rates of cancer, high blood pressure, low birth weight, diabetes, severe asthma and upper respiratory disease, and increased risk of heart attacks, hookworms, heat strokes, and lead poisoning. Environmental racism made communities of color especially vulnerable to the worst outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic. And to the same effect, environmental racism leaves communities of color especially vulnerable to climate change. Consider Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Maria. With Cancer Alley in Louisiana and the ever-present colonialism of Puerto Rico, these communities were deemed disposable long before the hurricanes hit. And afterwards, they became climate refugees in search of a new home, only to be met with hostility and violence. Their humanity disregarded yet again. This is the case all around the world as the so-called Global South currently faces climate disasters, famine, and drought with little to no acknowledgement or aid. But this is the case in your backyard too. Consider which areas of Connecticut lose power for the longest and get plowed last after extreme tropical and winter storms. These are not issues we can simply ignore, as it will only get worse. The science indicates that we have less than 30 years to radically change the world. Frankly, I don't even believe we have 30 years. And while that may sound terrifying, as it should, I think I know the solution. Intersectional activism and collaborative organizing with love. So what does that mean? Let's start with intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, originally created to help legal systems better account for the unique discrimination Black women face. It has since been expanded to account for all identities and their intersections, like race and sexual orientation, gender and ability, religion and nationality, and so on. There are 3 main pillars of intersectionality. 1, structural intersectionality, which refers to how inequities affect people's everyday life, like unequal access to opportunity and resources. 2, representational intersectionality, which refers to how certain narratives and images are produced about individuals of marginalized identity. Consider how the news reports on certain people, or how TV and movie roles stereotype others. And 3, political intersectionality, which indicates how those occupying multiple identities can be caught between conflicting political agendas. Where do Black women fall in feminist agendas that completely ignore racism? How are trans women of color represented or protected, if at all? Now, due to its complexity, intersectionality is often overlooked, but I'm here to tell you that embracing this complexity, embracing these intersections, is the absolute minimum for creating inclusive and sustainable solutions to the very complicated problems we face. Intersectional activism recognizes this necessity and incorporates it into organizing. Now, collaborative organizing is just a step above traditional community organizing, as it allows you to organize people of multiple identities and thus address multiple facets of an issue, rather than just one piece of the puzzle. Collaborative organizing means bringing everyone to their seat at the table. It's not enough to just leave the seat open. We must empower people to take up space and use their voice. That brings diversity of thought, perspective, and ideas. It strengthens collective action. And collective action requires love and solidarity to fight for each other as much as we fight for ourselves. Complex issues of environmental racism and climate change require collaborative organizing and intersectional activism to build a better, brighter, equitable, and inhabitable future. Trying to solve climate change without addressing environmental racism would be like trying to solve a gigantic puzzle with half the pieces missing. It won't work. And nobody gets to see the pretty picture. Now, I want to clarify and say that I'm not just here talking the TED Talk. I walk the walk. As a scholar activist at UConn, I got heavily involved in grassroots organizing and joined steering committees and working groups. In doing so, I noticed a jarring lack of solidarity and a complete disregard for intersectionality that was not only disheartening, but counterproductive. The potential for intergenerational, intersectional activism was wasted. But again, I knew the solution. So I founded UConn Collaborative Organizing, also known as UCO, and provided this necessary infrastructure. In just our first year, we collaborated with over 20 organizations, including, but not limited to, the NAACP UConn chapter, UConn Students for One Health, the Undergraduate Student Government, the Graduate Employee Union, Eco Husky, Revolution Against Rape, Project Fashion, Poetic Release, Youth for Socialist Action, Fridays for Futures, and so many others. And we did amazing work together. We still do. We organized seminars, clothing swaps, sit-ins, climate strikes, and open mics. We educated and mobilized hundreds of students, faculty, and staff, and our marches have been featured in newspapers ranging from the Daily Campus and Hartford Courant to the New York Times. Now, as a scholar activist, I also did research on the topic of cross-cultural engagement and intersectional activism, but I'll save that for another talk. So what are the steps? How do we practice collaborative organizing the right way? Well, we do it with love. Yes, love. So let's get into it. L, listen to learn. Listen to learn. Ignorance may be bliss for some, but it is counterproductive for all. No single person has all the answers, but when we actively listen to learn, not just to respond, we develop this collective genius that is innovative and resilient. Oh, Organize with an open mind. Harness that creativity while remaining intentional. Get clear on a goal without getting locked into one way of achieving it. Think outside the box. There is no one form of activism. What matters is the intention behind the practice. V, value a variety of perspectives. Holding intersectionality at the foundation of your activism is powerful. But with that, of course, comes the responsibility to take the extra step to educate yourself and your people. You must be able to check yourself and be checked by others while admitting when you're wrong and pushing forward with a new perspective. The possibility for growth is boundless, but only when you value the perspective of others enough to lose your ego and think outside yourself. And E, engage everyone in every possible way. Now, have some scruples, but as an organizer, you want to reach folks from all walks of life. So you must be mindful of working people's time and inclusive of all forms of ability and language barriers. Try to think of every possible barrier making your activism inaccessible and create a solution ahead of time. Engage your network and encourage people to come as they are. We cannot be exclusive in our fight for justice. That is collaborative organizing with love. Listen to learn, organize with an open mind, value a variety of perspectives, and engage everyone in every way possible. That's the power of love. Now, one of my inspirations is the late Fred Hampton, rest in power. And he said, we must fight fire with water. Fight racism, not with racism, but with solidarity. This is why I fight deep-seated hate with radical love. Systemic racism is rooted in hate. All acts of subjugation share a foundation of hate. Hate is divisive, fear-mongering, oftentimes illogical, and always misinformed. Hate keeps people apart, blocking off communication and opportunities for progress. Hate is dehumanizing and immeasurably destructive. But I believe we can rectify this. We are not tethered to this course by default, but by choice. And if we choose love, we can change the destination. Listen, existing is a group project. So when it comes to the task of preserving our world and creating an equitable society for all, procrastination is lethal. And as the global temperature continues to rise, we must understand that there are 0 degrees of separation between your family and the family whose home is burning in the west coast of America, or the indigenous families in the Amazon rainforest, or the families in the southern hemisphere of Australia. And unfortunately, the list goes on. But we must also remember the actual billions of animals dying too. We share this ecosystem, connecting our health to that of the land and all other animals. I opened discussing the COVID-19 pandemic to make it abundantly clear that environmental and social justice are one and the same. When I hear the words, "I can't breathe," I think of Eric Garner, George Floyd, and all the Black women whose last words we will never know, like Layleen Polanco and Breonna Taylor. But when I hear the words, "I can't breathe," I also think of all the children born with asthma because their communities are polluted. And I think of all the people dying now from those same communities from COVID-19 pneumonia. Each is the same call for justice. Collaborative organizing is, to me, the best tool for the intersectional activism necessary to address environmental racism and climate change before it is too late. To my scholar activists wondering how to begin this work, start with the body paragraph and don't hold back. Decolonize the academic spaces you exist in. Your work can have a lasting impact on this world, so make sure it is a positive one. To my grassroots organizers, trust in yourself. You know your community better than anyone else, and that knowledge is power. Always think big. Build your own table, then bring your people to it. And to everyone, never forget that your life is just as sacred as the next person's. I know my Black life matters, period. So know that yours does too. Do not adjust to injustice. Do not become desensitized to brutalization. Do not normalize devastation. Always challenge the status quo. Systems of oppression may be familiar, but they are not fair. We can either continue to let the mistakes and hate of the past reform itself into new systems of exploitation and destruction, or we can move forward, acting with radical love and transforming our world together. We are limited only by our imagination. So next time you picture the world in 5, 10, or 20 years, picture the brightest and best possible future. I'm hopeful for a world where social and environmental justice is an attained reality through collaborative organizing and intersectional activism, but I will not wait 20 years. The future is ours to create. I believe wholeheartedly that we have the power to create the changes needed to save our world and make it a better place for all. What we don't have is the time to wait and see who will take the first step. That's on us. So let's take it together. Thank you.